This is the eqdām Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the eqdām Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Cal Cal's Corner here on the eqdām Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korf, and I'm your host, and our executive producer is the legendary Rob McConnell, who, of course, is the founder and host of the eqdām radio show. So, welcome to tonight's episode. We have a very full agenda of subjects to cover because on Cal's Corner here, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. As early as 2 weeks from now, we will start having some wonderful guests across the spectrum of subjects, and tonight we're going to cover a lot of them, so let's get started. Okay, first of all, in our first segment here, let's give you a quick update on the tragic shooting in Las Vegas that occurred recently in the United States, the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States of America. Police are saying that they still have no formal motive that they're declaring for the shooting. Now, there's a couple possibilities for this. They've also announced that they have been examining the body of the shooter to try to see if there was evidence that he was crazy. Well, of course he's crazy. No sane person is going to do this, even if they believed it was the right thing to do. It's just not a sane thing to do. Maybe they'll find some damage in his brain or something like that to excuse it. And, of course, there cannot be ever an excuse. Or there might be that they know the real motive, and for reasons to protect the integrity of the investigation, they're not revealing it yet to the public. Bottom line is there's still a lot more unknown than known about this incident. We'll give you updates as they merit being communicated. All right, so that's an update on the Las Vegas shooter and mass shooting spree that he was responsible for recently in the United States. Now let's switch to a totally different subject because she's still relevant in the news. Former Secretary of State and arguably the biggest loser in American political history in the modern era, Hillary Clinton, has had to put the brakes on her book tour in the UK. Now remember, Hillary has written a book called What Happened. It's just a statement. It's not a question mark. It's supposed to explain why it is that she lost the presidential election to Donald Trump. And as my book, which is titled What Didn't Happen, Exposing Hillary's False Claims, she blames everybody but herself for losing the election. And it just is not true. In fact, I don't like calling people liars, but when Hillary says that voter suppression in Wisconsin caused her to lose that state, it's a blatant lie. In fact, she cites a study that was commissioned by her own super PAC, who gave her over $130 million. So no wonder the study comes out and says nonsense stuff like that. It's not going to tell the truth. It's a vested conflict of interest. And Hillary doesn't even mention the incestuous relationship she has with that study that was done and that it was funded by her own super PAC. Again, in Washington, D.C., you understand why Trump does say drain the swamp, because it's not only full of alligators, it's also full of proverbial snakes in Washington, D.C. So Hillary has broken her toe. According to the reports, she was going down the stairs too fast, wearing high heels. I don't know that Hillary wears high heels that often, but anyway, she was carrying a cup of coffee. And I'll leave it up to you to decide how responsible it is for a 70-odd-year-old woman to run down the stairs in high heels carrying coffee. I don't think you'd want to advise your kids to do that, but this is Hillary Clinton. The good news for people who admire the truth is that because she's had to cancel almost all of her appearances now, she's appeared on one show wearing her foot brace. If she's not talking to the media, then she can't lie anymore. That's always good news. But Hillary is still on her woe is me, feel sorry for me, blame everybody but me. And the fact is that Hillary lost the election because the voter demographics that supported Obama just didn't want to support her. In fact, most of the Democrats who could have voted didn't bother doing it. And had she carried the black vote to the degree Obama did, Hillary lost so much stuff, so much demographics compared to Obama, that 53% of the women who voted in the presidential election, they voted for Trump. Had maybe 49% voted for Trump or even 52%, she'd have won, because the number of votes that turned the election was roughly, if you want to round the number, roughly 100,000. And that's rounding it up. So the point is that it's Hillary Clinton's fault that she lost the election, but that's not what her book says. She says in other issues that I take full responsibility for whatever, but she doesn't really do that. And then she goes off on these tangents about, Russian conspiracy and so on. Yeah, the Russians were a factor, but not enough to throw the election. And this is ironic that Hillary, the so-called great feminist, didn't win the majority of the female vote, because remember Donald Trump's, inexcusable remarks about women and their anatomy, although they were said some 11, 12 years earlier, shouldn't have been an issue, but the Democrats and Hillary and Michelle Obama made them an issue, and so did the media because they hate Trump. It was a big typical American circus. The fact is Hillary did not win most of the women's voters, and that is her fault. We'll be back after this commercial break for the second segment of the show.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Cal's Corner here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. And once again, our executive producer is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, on Cal's Corner, we cover every week subjects that range from politics to the paranormal. And again, that's a wide spectrum. It includes pretty much anything under the sun. So, in tonight's episode here, we're going to cover, again, a wide variety of subjects. So let's get into segment 2 here, where we're going to focus on Europe during this segment. And then we'll, in segment 3, talk about President Donald Trump's rejection and resetting of the Iran nuclear deal and how that does affect everybody. So let's talk about Europe real quick. There is a new leader in Austria whose name is Sebastian Kurz, Kurz. He is now the youngest world leader. He is in his early 30s, very good-looking guy, very charismatic. And Austria, going back to the days of the far-right party, and a man named Jörg Haider, who later died in a car crash. Austria for years has been teetering on having a far right-leaning government. What has happened now is that Kurz has won the election. He is their new leader, and he ran on a platform that can be summarized as Austrians first, immigrants forget it. Now, Austria is a small country. It has a population of 9 million if you round up the numbers, so that's not a lot of people. And they, of course, have rejected Austrians almost to a man and woman. This insane and grossly mismanaged mass immigration stunt that began with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who let into Germany alone, this is not including other countries, some 1.2 million largely war refugees into Germany. And Germany has a population of about 80 million people. Ironically, for Germany, their population is now finally up to the level it was before Hitler started World War II. It's taken them this long, over 50 years, actually nearly 70, to recover their population levels because of the numbers of people who died in World War II from Germany. So what has happened is, in the German culture, and this is true for the Austrian culture even more so, the joke in Austria, and I've been to Austria many times, is that they have no sense of humor, Austrians. And when you go to Vienna or you go to Austria versus Germany, you can see that it's a little bit more frosty in Austria. They're a little bit more stiff, if you will, conservative. What they don't like is the way that the European Union tells them, you will take these people, you don't really have a say in the matter, and you will relocate them or we'll work with you. And so what happens is the average European feels like they have no say in what goes on in their country, and that what goes on and what they're entitled to do, and more importantly, what they're banned from doing, is determined and dictated to by the politicians in Brussels. And this is the nightmare that the European Union has become. And if you look at what has happened, the very concept of what's called Ordnung, or order, in German culture and in Austrian culture has totally gone out the window. Now, this does not mean that Austrians are by default immigrant phobic. That's not quite true. But what they don't like is to have their country, or especially small towns and villages, overrun by foreigners and to have the whole program mismanaged. And this is what has shocked most Germans and Austrians and Europeans as a whole, is how mismanaged this massive influx of immigrants has been, led by Chancellor Merkel. And although Angela Merkel got reelected, she didn't win a huge mandate. She's never been weaker, even though she's starting her fourth term in office. And she's had to make concessions. For the first time, and it's a little too late now, she has said that she's going to put limits on the number of immigrants that can come into Germany. And the voters are saying, well, duh, hello, why didn't you do this before? Because Germany blew it. She blew it. France has blown it. And this is why, if you look at the recent election history in France, it was a contest between the far-right contender Marie Le Pen versus Emmanuel Macron, who won the election. And now he's already more unpopular than popular, and he's only been in office for not even 6 months. So what has happened is there is a rise in populism across Europe. In the United States, that has absolutely happened. Donald Trump is in the White House, not Hillary Clinton. And if that wasn't evidence of a rise in populism, nothing is. In fact, the next election in Europe is going to take place in a few days in the country known as the Czech Republic. And the leader who's going to win that election, unless there's a miracle at the polls to reverse it, is going to be a billionaire private entrepreneur, the Czech version of Donald Trump. And he's going to win the election. And so his name is Andrej Babiš. And he's running as an anti-establishment guy whose party is brand new. I was in Prague living there at the time when a new political party called ANO which means yes in the Czech language. He's head of that party, and they've made fantastic gains over the years. They're not an old party at all, and they are fueling and feeding on the sentiment of voter frustration. And this is interesting because you have to take this seriously. This isn't just an emotional knee-jerk reaction to a massive influx of immigrants. And here's why. Normally, what sways elections is the state of the economy. When a party is doing bad because the economy is bad or it's being mismanaged, they tend to get tossed out. And you have this swing of the pendulum going back and forth between usually the Social Democrats and maybe the liberals or conservatives. If the liberals don't fix things economically, the conservatives tend to take over. When they screw that up, then the liberals are given another chance. And what you end up with is a polarized two-party system that people say has failed us, and that has happened in the United States. You've got the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're not doing things to move the country forward. There's a lot of stagnation. In fact, under the 8 years that Barack Obama was president, the Republicans made a point to wear the badge of being the party of no with pride and honor, and there's no honor in that. You should put the country first, not your political party. And even when Obama was right, they did everything they could to sabotage and undermine him, and that is wrong. Politicians especially are elected to put the best interests of the voters and the country first. Anything else is irrelevant. And this is something that both parties have lost sight of. And there was a study done by Princeton University, which is quite interesting. They went back decades and looked at the congressional record and found out that some 90% of the laws that Congress had passed, now this is the important stuff, has been on behalf of vested interests. And what the study concluded was that the United States effectively became an oligarchy during the time of President Bill Clinton. And what has been interesting about that conclusion is not only is it valid, study was very solid and very well done, but when I shared this fact with Clinton supporters, they were all up in arms, as usual, because you can't dare criticize the Clintons even when you tell the truth in the eyes of their supporters. They said, no, it happened under Reagan. They didn't deny it become an oligarchy and vested interest because the Clintons, of course, are masters at pay-to-play politics. They've become quite rich by using that business model, if you will, disguised as a charity. And the study said that, no, it didn't happen under Reagan. It actually started under Clinton. It began in earnest under Clinton, and of course it can be traced back to the time when he was renting out the Lincoln bedroom for over $5,000 a night. Remember that, folks? For a little over $5,000 as a donation to the Democrats, you could sleep in President Abraham Lincoln's bedroom, and then you could that morning have coffee with President Bill Clinton and get a photograph taken with him. And that, of course, went on for over a year. It only stopped because of public outrage, and tens of millions of dollars was raised. And, of course, many of those donors, or at least enough of them, were crooked people who were later indicted for election and campaign fraud and illegal donations of large amounts of money to campaigns and not reporting it. And a lot of the donors were from Asia, of course, because the Clintons essentially led the charge to outsource a lot of stuff from America to Asia overseas. And, of course, we must remember that Hillary Clinton was for the international trade agreement that would have lined up a bunch of nations in Asia against China before she found out that there were polls indicating that most Americans were against it. And then, of course, she says, well, it doesn't meet my gold standard, so I'm now against it. And she had done a flip-flop. Clinton was famous and is infamous for doing flip-flops just like John Kerry does all the time. So getting back to the issue of Europe, we have to remember that the first sign that things are not going well in the European Union is, of course, the British vote called Brexit, where most of the people in London voted to stay in the EU, but the rest of the country said, we want out of this mess. And, of course, Britain is a shining example of how not to do immigration properly. And, of course, they're continuing, like France, low-hanging fruit targets for terrorist groups. And as we've reported here on this show, even though they have strict gun control laws, the terrorists use everything from homemade bombs to knives to automobiles to kill innocent people over there. And what's interesting is that over half of the population of London is non-white. And in fact, Punjabi is the second most widely spoken language there because there's a huge influx of Indians and Pakistanis who live in London. When I was in London, almost on every corner where you've got these little shops that sell cigarettes and fast food and things like that, their version of what we call 7-Eleven in the United States, you won't find a white-skinned person owning them. You'll see a foreigner doing it. And while that's okay, the issue is controlled immigration versus uncontrolled and chaotic immigration, and the EU has not been responsible in that area. So the majority of people in the UK said, we want no part of being part of the EU. We want our own destiny back and our own sovereignty. Then, of course, you had the election in France. For the first time ever, a far-right candidate came within one election round of being president. Marine Le Pen lost. But she lost to a guy who promised to be different, and it turns out that he's more the same old, same old. He's a wealthy individual, a young individual. He has not kept his promises. This is, of course, President Macron, and now most French voters regret having voted for him. Then you had scares in Germany as a pushback against Merkel's mismanagement, which was deliberate. No one forced her to do things the wrong way. She barely got into office, meaning the election was a lot closer than she'd like. And most importantly, the Alternative for Deutschland party, which didn't even exist until recently, it's a far-right anti-immigration policy which doesn't even make apologies for Germany's conduct during World War II. She said they should be proud of their military. They now have members in parliament. In Hungary, you have a rise of the far right. In the Czech Republic, you're going to have a populist in office in a couple of days. And of course, just now in Austria, you have Sebastian Kurz. And what they're going to do is put an immediate stop to this interference by Brussels on how to handle their own immigration issues. So this is what politicians get when they don't deliver. The people get angry, even when the economies are doing fine, and they push back and they say, anybody but you. And they'll even vote for people like Donald Trump or whatever as populist candidates. So we'll be back after this commercial break with segment 3 here on Cal's Corner.
This is the eqdām Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the eqdām Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner radio show. Again, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. So to wrap up summarizing what's going on in Europe, this idea of a superstate called the European Union, it's ironic because I remember living in Prague, and of course I was there before, during, and after the Czech Republic voted to join the EU. And on the one hand, it was a great thing because you had free trade. It was one big trade zone of roughly 550 million people. So, for example, in the Czech Republic, in the capital city of Prague, I remember there were times I'd go to the supermarket and I couldn't get tomatoes during the snow season in December, January. They just weren't there. They don't grow them during that time of year in the Czech Republic. But after they joined the EU, we could get strawberries and tomatoes all year round because they were grown in Spain or in other areas where the weather was much warmer and not so cold. Because in the Czech Republic, they have seasonal weather It's basically a three-season country, and of course they get snow, either Swedish or Russian blizzard conditions during the winter. I actually like seasonal weather, so it didn't bother me. I was surprised how I could be out in weather that was, 10 or 15 degrees below zero and didn't feel like it. But then it depended whether the snow or blizzards came from Sweden or whether they came from Russia, because they were very different. One was a dry winter, the other was very wet and sloppy. So I appreciated the fact that I could get pretty much all the fruits and vegetables I wanted all year round, because there's always some country in Europe that was growing them, at different times. That was great. But then I started to see this control. For example, if I wanted cucumbers or zucchinis, they were all wrapped in plastic. That was a law, okay? And then the fruit had to be a certain size or you wouldn't see it. And you started to see this superstate mentality kick in. And you started having former leaders like the former prime minister and Czech president Václav Klaus, who said he remembers the superstate mentality when the Soviet Union used to rule over what was then Czechoslovakia. And he said this is a bad thing. In fact, there was a lot of pressure put on the Czechs to join the euro currency, to join the Eurozone. And because Klaus is a economic expert, meaning he was the former head of the Czech National Bank, he understands economics. He said, we can't do this because we'll go bankrupt. He cited the country of Greece years before they had the official debt problem. He said that this is a house of cards country that's going to collapse. They haven't really met the criteria to join the EU. The books have been cooked, and that is true. They were actually helped in that process by the American investment banking houses on Wall Street, and of course by Germany and France, who wanted everyone to go into the Eurozone. And he said that we can't be expected as a small country to bail somebody else out when we've got our own problems, and he was right about that. And he proved to be prophetic in that sense. He was widely criticized for it. I remember supporting him as a journalist, reporting on it years ago there. So the EU had its advantages. The idea that I loved, for example, being able to walk into Germany without having to there was no more border guards there. There was no more barrier or entry. Because what I used to have to do when I first moved there, before I got my residency permit, which was always 1 year at a time, is every 90 days I'd have to take the bus or train to the German border in Warnsdorf. And I would get out and walk to the border station. And there would be some Czech guards there and policemen. And there would be this, gate. And they'd give me a stamp on my passport saying I was leaving the country. Then I'd go a couple hundred meters up the road to a nice little pub, order lunch, have a nice, wonderful German beer. Czechs make the best beer in the world as well. Then I'd finish in about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, taking my time. I'd walk back to the same booth on the other side of the street, little narrow 2-lane road, and the Germans would give me a stamp saying I was leaving their country. So I had a exit stamp for the Czech Republic, an entry stamp for Germany, then an exit stamp for Germany, then an entry stamp for the Czech Republic. And because the bus ran every couple of hours, I would make sure that I got back to the bus stop in Warnsdorf so that I could then take the 2-hour trip back to Prague. And I'd have to do this every 90 days. And I didn't mind it because it gave me an excuse to go travel and see things. Warnsdorf is a very interesting border town because they're a mixture of Bohemian Czech culture and the more conservative German culture. It's a very fascinating area geographically because they've got these big cliffs that rise up out of nowhere, and they look like they're all made of coal. They're this really dark black rock. And there's actually people who have their homes burrowed in the mountains. It's amazing to see, and there's no earthquakes up there. But it's just fantastic country to hike around in, and I love traveling, so it was an excuse to do it. Now, did I mind the trip? No, I didn't enjoy the bus, but I'd do something on my laptop or whatever. But I did love the fact that it gave me an excuse to travel. And then I went there before I left Europe to move to India, where I live now. And it was weird going back there. I actually filmed it. And all I saw was the remains of that station. It was just a wide open road, and the sign, welcome, willkommen to Deutschland was still there, welcome to Germany. Other than that, the guardhouse and everything was gone, and I kind of missed it. I felt like, wow, at least I was here for that part of history. Now, what has happened since then is there's been an outbreak of terrorism. There's been such bureaucratic control from Europe that the average European is saying, we've had enough of this. And again, the thing that the bureaucrats in Brussels need to pay attention to is that the economies of Austria and the Czech Republic are actually doing quite well right now. They're absolutely on the rebound. And in the case of Austria, they're doing fine. They've been fine for years. So it's not economics or problems with the economy that is causing voter backlash. It is this stupidity that is rampant in the West and, of course, now in Europe, of what I call the la liberal left, where everyone is so concerned about being politically correct and trying to make everybody live in some sort of utopia that's never going to happen, that is not grounded in reality. And countries feel like they don't have their own cultures and identity anymore. In fact, there was an article yesterday in the paper about a small German village that has been overrun by immigrants, just dropped there randomly, it seems, by authorities. And now the Germans who live in there not only fear, and they have a right to fear that, the loss of their culture, but are saying, who's absorbing whom? They're absorbing us. And they have a right to feel that way. In fact, Angela Merkel is a hypocrite on the issue because for years, before she opened the floodgates, she said that this multiculturalism doesn't work. That's a quote from her. And she said that if they do come to Germany, they must learn the German language. She has since changed her mind and said, oh, no, it's not necessary. Well, what happens when you have a group of foreigners who come to a country and live there and get a better standard of life, and they don't integrate, they don't even speak the native language or even try to learn it? That's not a good recipe for cultural harmony or peace and harmony between different cultures. And that has been a real problem. So, to end the part on Europe, one last thing I want to add before we switch subjects here is that the government of France now is getting ready to pass a law that basically says that if you whistle at a woman, you'll get a fine from the police right there, instant. So let's say you see a beautiful woman and you do what's called a cat whistle. I can't even whistle, so I can't do it for you. You'll get a fine by the police. That's considered sexual harassment. Now, I will tell you as an American that I have mixed feelings about that. First of all, I'm against sexual harassment for anybody, period. I don't care whether they're male or female. What I admire in Europe, though, which I found refreshing compared to the United States, is in the United States, a lot of women want to be men. They consider themselves to be feminists. So they dress a little more like men compared to how they used to dress when I was a young boy. And that's just the way the country is. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just pointing it out as someone who has observed it and experienced it firsthand in what I've seen. I remember my father telling me that he used to come home from work at night, and when the feminist movement was taking off in the 70s, he was saying that there were women who couldn't lift things at work but still got the job anyway and had to have the men lift stuff for them because they weren't physically as strong because everyone had to be equal. He lost opportunities to be a manager because blacks had gotten the position or Hispanics because they were not white, and he was white, so he was passed over. That to me is going a little bit too far. If you're qualified, period. Shouldn't matter what race you are, shouldn't matter what sex you are. And I've always been against this gender pay gap where women don't get paid as much as men do just because they're women. That's wrong. We should all be paid the same by position because we're people. Whether you're a man or a woman should not matter. And that's a problem and a hypocrisy that America still suffers from, where women make 30 to 40% less than men do as a statistical rule. But then there's nuances in there that do explain some of it, but not all of it. There still is rampant sexism. Now, having said that, one of the things I enjoyed in Europe is that men could be men and women could be women. Women love being women. They love dressing up. They loved wearing the high heels, the short skirts, whatever made them feel sexy or effeminate. And I'll share with you one personal story real quick. I remember there were a couple of times where I went to open a door for a woman in the U.S., and they'd get mad at me and say, "Why are you doing that? Don't you think I can open the door myself?" I was like, "I'm just trying to be polite. I would open the door for anybody ahead of me. I don't care what sex you are." And I thought, boy, just don't be so uptight. And then in Europe, they expect you to open the door for them because they're a woman. And so I heard from many women in Europe that they find American women to be a little too masculine, that they enjoy being women, and that women should be women and men should be men. And I found the European culture to be a lot more open, a lot more free-flowing. And I found that to be ironic because here I was in a country, the Czech Republic, used to be Czechoslovakia, in the middle of Europe, used to be at one point last century dictated over by Hitler and the Nazis, and then, of course, Stalin and the Soviet Union. And yet there were more freedoms in that country after communism fell than there still exist today in the United States. And I found that to be ironic, and I found it very liberating. So the reason I have a soft spot for Europe, and probably always will, is because I admire the cultural diversity, and I love the fact that people love to have a great time. There's so much freedom there that Americans wouldn't know what to do with it because America is becoming so politically correct and so afraid of its own shadow that it has become ridiculous. So the French are passing this law, and of course the bureaucrats are going to mess it up. They're going to do it in such a way where the law becomes a little bit too much of a big brother. And while I don't think you should sit there and harass anybody sexually or in any way, it's just not right. Just like we shouldn't have discrimination. What does that say about a culture when you have to pass a law to regulate that? It's a bit curious because, of course, the bureaucrats will overdo it and do it wrong when the spirit of the law, or at least its intention, might be admirable or noble, but the implementation is going to be something else entirely. Now, I've gone way over the minutes I wanted to spend on the subject, but I wanted to end it on that. After the station break here, what we will do is come back and talk about Donald Trump leaving the Iran nuclear agreement. He will not certify that Iran is complying with the terms of that agreement. We'll be back after this break.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to the final segment here on Cal's Corner radio show, where we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. Okay, for the last subject we're going to talk about tonight, this concerns the Iran nuclear deal that Barack Obama and former Secretary of State for the United States John Kerry brokered along with what's known as the P5+1 group of nations, which of course includes European Union, Great Britain, and Russia, and so on. The nuclear deal supposedly is supposed to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And of course, as I've reported years ago as a journalist, it doesn't do any such thing. Barack Obama outright lied to the world when he was highlighting the so-called strengths of the agreement. And let me prove it. Having reported on this issue for years as it was relevant, I was against the Iran deal because I thought that it could have been done a lot better, and that the fact that the United States caved in, that means Obama and Kerry caved in to some of Iran's demands, since Iran needed the deal more than the rest of the world did, that it should have been better, but it wasn't. So America has been stuck with it ever since. Now, what's happened real quickly before I get into some facts here is the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, has said that he will no longer certify that to Congress that Iran is complying with the agreement. In fact, he has ordered his staff to go back to basics and to see if they can get a better deal and add terms and conditions to the Iran deal that will help guarantee that Iran never does develop a nuclear weapon. And this reminds me of what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had said. He said that a real agreement that is worth its weight in gold is one that makes it impossible for a country to ever to develop a nuclear weapon, rather than punt the issue 10 years down the road, which is what Obama essentially did. See, one of the weaknesses in the American system of politics, it's also one of its strengths, ironically, just depends on how the issue is managed, is a president has 4 years in office, and 2 of those 4, if he wants to run for re-election, has to be spent running for re-election. And the first year is lost trying to get set up. Then he's got year 2 and 3. Then the 4th year he's got to spend on the campaign trail. So it's really only 2 years of solid work that gets done if he's lucky. And Obama was never lucky in that sense, thanks to the Republicans and the fact that he had too much of an agenda that most Americans did not agree with. And that is reflected in the election of Donald Trump as a successor to Obama. So Trump has said and that the Iran deal when he ran for president was always a bad deal. And Trump has said that it was unprecedented that Iran should be paid all this money up front when they haven't even delivered on the goods. And as I wrote in a full-page special that appeared in the Daily Post a few days ago, I critiqued paragraph by paragraph what Trump was saying, and most of what he said was actually factually correct. That's unusual for Trump, at least based on his past patterns. But there were some things he said that were not true, and I'll explain that right now. He said, for example, that Iran had exceeded the amount of heavy water that they're allowed to make twice. That is true. They did do that. But what Trump did not say is that to be compliant, Iran sold that heavy water to other countries on the market, profited from it. And so what Trump is going to do is try to rework the agreement so that Iran cannot do that in the future. And if it does exceed its agreed limits, that it will not profit from it. Otherwise, there's no incentive for compliance. And he's right about that. Now, I've always said, because I reported on it years ago, I had written a series of articles in August of 2015, which appeared in the newspaper Daily Post. And I wrote that Obama did lie. I was very blunt in my reporting as usual. What I'm going to do is just summarize what I had said a couple of years ago, because it is now 2 years later, and a little over 2 years later. And what Trump is saying is exactly what I said a couple years ago. And bottom line is the reason he's going back for a better deal is because he's right. We should have a better deal. Iran is saying they're going to resist it. The European Union, of course, doesn't want to deal with it. They've got their hands full trying to live in their ivory towers. And Russia, of course, who stands to lose a lot of money because they make the reactors if the deal totally goes south. What they want to do is they want to try to find a way that Iran will agree to it. And Iran really has no choice. The alternative for Iran is going to cost them billions of dollars and a lot of problems if they don't agree to modify their stance. All sides are going to want to save political face, of course, because there's that image to maintain. But the fact is, Iran remains a global threat to the world. And what is sad is that Iran is going around and using the war against the Islamic State to execute a lot of political opponents who are not terrorists, but because they don't support the regime in Tehran, they're murdering people, and they have death squads that go around that are sponsored by Hezbollah and other entities that are Iran's puppets and cronies. And this is being grossly underreported in the West. The West doesn't really care. And for better or for worse, the Kurds are the only sane group in the area in Iraq, and they're all that stands between Iran's hegemony and their fight to be the dominant superpower in the Middle East. And it is the only thing that is stopping them from succeeding, and the Kurds need help. They can't do it by themselves. And the U.S. is aligned with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia has its own problems. They're as radical and as extreme in many things that Iran is as well, because, again, there is this divide in Islam between Shia and Sunni Muslims. They've been killing each other gleefully, if you ask them, for over 1,400 years, because each one considers the other side to be heretics. So to make a long story short, what Obama said, and this is a quote, he said, after 2 years of negotiations, we have achieved a detailed arrangement that permanently prohibits Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. It cuts off all of Iran's pathways to a bomb. It contains the most comprehensive inspection and verification regime ever negotiated to monitor a nuclear program. Now, that was a blatant lie, folks. What I wrote at the time was pure nonsense. Obama lies at least one time in each of these three sentences, which is shameful. His first false claim is that the agreement, quote, permanently prohibits Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, unquote. In reality, it does no such thing. The word permanent means, according to the dictionary, everlasting and eternal. The opposite word of permanent is temporary. Obama and Kerry's Iran deal has a maximum shelf life of 15 years, with most of its protections, as he euphemistically calls them, ending within a decade. 10 to 15 years is nowhere near permanently, unless you're Barack Obama. What's next? By this type of dishonest, twisted logic, it is possible to be just a little bit pregnant. So then I said Obama's second lie is when he says it cuts off all of Iran's pathways to a bomb. No, it does not. Iran can continue to lie and cheat as it always has done concerning its nuclear weapons program ever since its radical, hate-driven Ayatollahs took over the country. Iran can easily do this by simply using secret facilities that only Iran knows exists. Most of the country will not be open to inspections, not even past nuclear weapons-related facilities, which Iran has used to get away with cheating over the decades. The third lie in Obama's sentence is when he falsely claims that the agreement, contains the most comprehensive inspection and verification regime ever negotiated to monitor a nuclear program. And then I wrote, even Obama must know that this is not true. Here's why. Not only will no snap inspections be allowed. Now, snap inspection is an inspection that can happen instantly on the spot as determined by a UN weapons inspector. The cameras that are to be used to record Iran's compliance at various monitored facilities will not even be live ones. Instead, there will only be videotape for inspectors to watch after the fact. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine a monitoring system where you don't even get a live signal from the cameras? Instead, you have to be given a videotape by the people you're monitoring? And then I pointed out that by contrast, even in agreements reached with communist North Korea, which failed under Bill Clinton, the cameras were live. Under the terms negotiated with former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, the video feeds were also live. Are Obama and his speechwriters this ignorant of basic history? Highly unlikely. His claim is a brazen lie. Now, Obama made other false claims, such as there will be 24 by 7 monitoring of Iran's key nuclear facilities. For decades, inspectors will have access to Iran's entire nuclear supply chain, from the uranium mines and mills where they get the raw materials to the centrifuge production. There's no way they can cheat, etc. Now, I also pointed out that he lied when he said this because it's just not true, okay? We must remember that under the so-called watchful eyes of the international community, Iran was able to get to the point of reaching what's called the breakout stage. That is, Iran still today can make a nuclear weapon anytime they want to. And when he says that under the terms of the deal, inspectors will have the permanent ability to inspect any suspicious sites in Iran, there is nothing, absolutely nothing in the agreement, you can look it up yourself, that says they have that right. So Obama says it's in the agreement, but it is not true. And it makes you wonder what version of the agreement he's looking at, or he's lying, and I believe he's lying. In fact, as I exposed earlier in another piece, taking Obama to task and John Kerry for lying, because that's exactly what they did, in order to do a inspection over a disputed site, they have to give Iran 24 days notice. 24 days, not hours. And if Iran doesn't agree, it'll take 4 countries to vote to agree at the UN that Iran should let the inspectors in. And if Iran refuses, then that's it. It's a stalemate. They walk away and there's no penalty enforced. So the Iran nuclear agreement was never a good one. And it was not the best deal that they could have gotten, but it's the one that Obama made a point to get with John Kerry, and they have misrepresented it to the world. So Trump is going to change it. He's not buying it, and we'll stay tuned and report on it as news develops.